Hey there, students. It's Mr. Sharp again here for the third video in our Unit 4 series for the Technology, Engineering, and Design course videos. Last time we talked a great deal on the design process and how that's applicable to every building project that you work on as a technician, as an engineer, or anytime you're working on your own at home or around the workplace. And last time we talked about two different key terms that I said were going to be very important, and they were criteria and constraints. So this is the actual bulk of this video explaining these two terms. We'll talk about two others, but we'll make it short and sweet. So like we talked about last time, in the fifth step of the engineering design process, you have to identify two different types of items. One is criteria. Again, we talked about criteria being requirements that you have to meet in your design. To talk about this further, criteria are also elements that help make your design of your product function. Maybe it's aesthetic, or maybe sometimes there are requirements that have to be met in order for you to put your product out into the manufacturing world. Oftentimes when we're defining the problem of a product that we want to design and build, your criteria is going to be given to you in the form of your design must meet these certain standards in order for it to be manufactured. In the design project that I'm giving you for the bridge, this may include the minimum requirements for the height, width, and length of your bridge, or sometimes it may be your bridge must hold this amount of weight. For this project I'm giving you, must hold up to 25 pounds. These are requirements that are identified from the very beginning. And as we learn from the design process, it's never a step 1 through 12 linear path. It's always contingent. So sometimes your criteria may be identified for you very early on. Caveat with that, constraints may be identified as well. We talked about constraints being restrictions in your design that you have to acknowledge. And sometimes it's going to be determined by the problem that we have to solve. So going back to the example of the cleaning product, you may think there are certain products or certain chemicals we cannot use in this product that have to meet federal regulations from a government agency. Sometimes for those restrictions in your design project for the bridge, you have to think your bridge must not weigh over this amount. You have a certain budget. These are all elements that make up your constraints. So these two key terms, criteria and constraints, you have to identify these early on so that way you can always make sure that you're following these guidelines when you're designing your product. And as always, when we're working in the field of engineering, if you're designing your products, you want to make it as efficient as possible, making your function or your process turning the most output from the input that you put in. So in order to meet these while maintaining our lines through criteria and constraints, you have to understand that sometimes there is going to be sometimes competing elements between the two as we're designing something. Sometimes if we're building the bridge, we want it to be this long to meet this certain length requirement. However, it's going to go over the weight of our constraints, which must not weigh over this amount. So sometimes you have to give up certain things in order to meet the happy medium, or sometimes to meet the criteria that will not go over the constraints. And this process of giving up those things, sometimes in order to meet that length requirement and stay under the weight, you may have to use lighter materials that are still strong, that still hold up the bridge. These are what we call trade-offs. When criteria and constraints compete against each other, and we have to determine how to resolve that issue by giving up one thing in order to gain another. That's the idea about trade-offs. You'll see this all the time in the shop. Sometimes if you don't have certain materials on hand that you cannot use, you have to find it with supplemental materials, or you have to extend your timeline. Sometimes your budget is going to restrict you from fulfilling a certain criteria that you want to use in your product, so you have to supplement with something cheaper. These are always going to be problems that we face as engineers, and it's not going to be solved. It's usually something we have to solve on our own through ingenuity and sometimes a little bit of street smarts in order to meet those using trade-offs. So today we discussed criteria, constraints, and trade-offs. Next time we're going to talk about the design process and actually how we sketch our designs. Hope to see you guys then, and Mason will see you guys there too. Y'all have a good one.